Hey, this is Liberty DeVito.
This is Mike Del Giudice.
This is Michael Cavanaugh from Broadway's Moving Out.
This is John Jackson, director of the Billy Joel Archive.
This is Russell Javers.
This is Richie Canada, and you're listening to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. It's awesome.
Welcome to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. I'm Michael Grosvenor.
And I'm Jack Firneno. Join us as we dig deep into Billy Joel's songs and history and what his music has meant to us. What are the 12 Billy Joel songs you can't live without?
That's what Jack and I are discussing over the next two episodes. We picked one track from each pop studio album that we would want if we were trapped on a desert island.
Our choices were rarely the hits, and not necessarily our favorite go-to songs either. Ultimately, the exercise revealed new insights into Billy's songwriting style and common themes throughout his catalog.
Join us as we dig deep into our desert island Billy Joel song picks.
This was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And I'm going to explain why in a second, but I figure I might as well mention this too, remember the old saying, you got a face for radio?
Yeah.
Well, just as we were about to update that to you got a face for podcasts, we all got to do video podcasts now. So, hello.
Right. Hello, folks.
When we do the audio podcasts, as we've been able to get a lot of clips, audio clips and clips from videos onto the episodes. But YouTube is a different beast. So if you're checking us out here, awesome. Be sure to check us out on your favorite podcast platform, and you'll get a little more out of it. We're able to augment what we're saying with the sound clips that we're referencing.
We'd love to be able to have it all completely trans over, but we got to get a little creative here. And we're experimenting here. Our first, 130 or 128 episodes are audio only, but we're jumping into this, and we're excited to see what comes together.
So here's our conceit for this episode. If we could only listen to one song from every album from here on out, personally each, which one would it be? For me, this was difficult because there were sort of three factors in mind. One was obviously, what sort of means the most to me. Number two is what are the best songs? And three, what was tripping me up was the actual desert island part. Like if I was actually stuck with nothing else to do, what do I want to hear?
Yeah, that's tricky. Well, yeah, that's where I found myself struggling a little bit more too, because there was a lot of songs that came close, but then I'm like, okay, if I'm looking at these 10 songs from this album and 9 of them are going to go away forever, I got to be really careful with what I'm choosing here.
Yeah, it's not necessarily your favorite because our favorites are going to change. It's,
right.
What's meaty enough to stand by itself that you could just not hear any of the other stuff.
Like there's songs that I love, but I got to be in just the right mood for it. You know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So like a song that is going to have a little bit wider relatability for me to where I'm not only going to want to hear it once every blue moon.
Yeah. Also, what kind of sound system we got on this island? We got like a little transistor radio, or did we get dropped there with like a classic Maxell ads worth of stereo equipment where our hair's getting blown back?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. Are we talking Gilligan's Island, or are we talking
some crazy Lost thing?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. That's most of the criteria. The rest of it is just, as usual, we're only using the studio albums, and that discounts also songs in the attic because we're focusing on the song itself a little more than the performance, which is where songs kind of comes in.
Yeah. So, that led us down to 12 albums: Cold Spring Harbor, Piano Man, Street Life Serenade, Turnstiles, The Stranger, 52nd Street, Glass Houses, The Nylon Curtain, An Innocent Man, The Bridge, Stormfront, and River of Dreams.
And, at some point we're going to be grown-ups and we'll be able to put fantasies and delusions on here. We're going to be so well-heeled in classical music and 18th century romanticism that we can comment soundly on that stuff, which ironically for me, it's almost like if I had to be stuck on a desert island, I might just take fantasies and delusions because it's just, I don't know it as well. It's going to give me the most to puzzle over and get used to.
Yeah.
Like if you were really
there's a little more to conquer there.
Yeah. My whole thing, to go on a quick tangent, when I got into opera, I was like, I took Carmen and I was like, I'm just going to listen to this over and over and over again until it sounds so familiar that it sounds like pop music to me, till it sounds that natural, familiar. And that's what I did. And that's what you got to kind of do with something like that. You just got to like give it that investment. But, we're grown-ups with grown-up responsibilities, and, sitting down and puffing a pipe and just staring at your record player is quite the luxury these days, huh?
Right? It sure is. I know.
Yeah.
This is such a wide parameter that while there's a chance of you and I having some overlap, I think there's almost a greater chance of us having unique songs to go over together.
Yeah. I'm interested to see where we land on this. Looking over my list, I guess I'll say now, almost as a spoiler, is I went for either the epics or the most visceral to me.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of song that either hits you and or you just crank. What song is going to have me dancing like a maniac when the rescue boat comes in and you're like, oh, he lost it. And I'm like, no, I'm just listening to my favorite rock song, like, dancing around. You know the old phrase, dance like nobody's watching? Well, nobody's been watching me the whole time I've been on this damn island, so this is what's been happening.
Little did we know we were actually on the Truman Show, and
yeah, some drone's been like scouting us for a while the rescue party's coming in,
This is the new reality TV. Yeah, someone really thinks they're lost. Not some Survivor show, but
yeah,
that would be messed up.
How long have you been streaming me?
Right.
You know what happens when I go behind that bush. You leave me alone.
Right. Come on, please. I know I'm stranded on an island, but have some civility here.
Yeah. Right. What me and the woodland critters do is between us.
That's right. It's between me and the oak trees.
Yeah. We're having relay races. Get your head out of the gutter. Anyway. All right. You want to hit it now that we've babbled for a couple minutes now?
We have.
Round 1. Fight.
All right. I want a good, clean fight.
Yeah. All right. No below the belt. No concert picks.
Nope. That's right. No demos. No alternate takes.
Yeah. Right.
I went from Cold Spring Harbor. Again, this is back in 1971. This was an interesting way to start it for me because I did go in order, album to album. There was a few that I love on the record. Actually, there's quite a few that I love on the record, but the one, surprisingly, that kept coming back to me was Turn Around. Musically and vocally, there's moments that feel like such classic early 70s Billy. And it's got a great movement to the melody, and while there's a few little juvenile lyrics, it feels a little more universal than some of the other songs to me. And yeah, it's one that I've always loved the melody to as well. And it's one that I go back to a lot on the record. And so that's probably the one I'm going to take with me.
So for all that talk about, no alternate takes, no nothing else, I went with You Can Make Me Free, but also specifically the original cut, not
That's
the
fair.
edited version on the 80s one. Like I said, I went either epic or visceral, and this is almost a split of the two because it's so long, but it's not an epic because it's a jam at the end, but it's a good jam. And, this is the one that always caught me on this album anyway, because I knew She's Got Away already. And so, you got Cold Spring Harbor on cassette, you got She's Got Away. You're like, okay, sounds a little different. And then just from that first piano chord of You Can Make Me Free, I was like, this is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got a lot of meat on the bone, and the extended version or the original version gives you a lot to work with there. It's a good vamp at the end.
It really is.
And even like for the times where the lyrics aren't great, because it's such a rocker, that gets forgiven more than when it's a soft song, when it's a ballad, when it's a singer-songwriter thing.
Sure. And I think it was one line in particular, because that was in contention for my Desert Island pick.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one line that I just couldn't get past. You want to guess?
Think of which one?
Yeah.
Drink Some Wine Again With You?
No, actually.
Okay.
So the one that I always bump on is I Can Take to the Skies, I Can Soar Like a Bird with This Heart Full of Song.
Really?
That seems so un-Billy Joel to me.
Well, yeah, but it's pretty cool. I mean, for the song, it really fits.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't not fit, but I just, something about the line just rubs me.
Yeah, it's a little ninth grade poetry to your secret admirer, but
Yeah.
I like it. Try to think of the part I'm thinking. Yeah, I like it because it's the bridge. I like where he goes with the melody there anyway. If I were to have a problem with that lyric, I get over it really quickly because I just like how the song goes at that point. Yeah,
Yeah.
it kind of reminds me of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, their take on Jerusalem, which you know that. Do you know that one? Like when
Yeah,
they did?
a little bit.
Yeah, so I actually, funny story, I blew my father's speakers out on that and I thought I had minutes to live. And that's how I learned he had fuses in the speakers because I came home from school and I put that one on. I wanted to see how far I could take it. And I found out and you hear like, and I'm like, oh God. Oh no. Now, you know, those tall brown Bose speakers I have in my dining room?
Yes.
Those are the speakers.
Those are them.
So maybe we'll throw those up on the screen here.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I just like took my CD out, like wiped my fingerprints off the entire affair and, you know, turn everything off and like waited for him to come home. And he goes, "Hey, Jack, come here." I'm like, "Oh God. Oh dear Lord." And he's like, "Check this out." And he goes, "You hear how this isn't working?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "All I have to do is replace this fuse." I'm like,
So do you think he knew and he was just like being cool about it? Or do you think he just thought it wasn't working anymore?
no, I think he thought it wasn't working. And I think he was just like almost happy to finally use the fuse because he probably had those speakers for almost 10 years at that point.
Yeah.
So he probably figured it was just something was going to happen at some point. Anyway, point being, I always got a kick out of that one, but that's actually like some old, like song everybody in the United Kingdom like had, or I guess at least in England had to sing like in school. Like it was one of those kind of songs. And Greg Lake said, you know, it's really lyrically a boring song except for this one part where it's like, "Bring me my arrows of desire" or something like that. Like other than that, he didn't like singing any of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It almost seems like that where it's like just that one line that just like, it's just so like sonorous and full of imagery that you go for it.
Yeah.
So I get a kick out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the song, by the way. So I'm definitely not knocking it.
Oh,
you know, funny too. One thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to on Turn Around. Which didn't factor into my choice for it to be the song, but is this the first known song about Elizabeth that like is like, She's Got a Ways, obviously like song 1 or whatever, but like she's name checked in the tune.
Oh yeah.
You know?
That's true. Is she she's not name checked anywhere else though.
No, I think that's the only song. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, Eliza.
I mean, like she's like Always a Woman is like about her. You know what I'm saying? She's Got a Way is to her.
Right.
Turn Around is, you know, sort of references her. So it's a little more in that camp.
This just flashed into my head. Like, do you ever see the Saturday Night Live sketch about like Jesse's Girl, where it's like Jesse was like the drummer's girlfriend or whatever, and Rick Springfield's playing. He's like, "Oh, I got this new song," and he's singing it, and the drummer's like, "What the hell?" Like I pictured Billy and John Small, like. Like, "John, I got this new tune," and he's like referencing his love for Elizabeth, and he's like,
"Is that Elizabeth?" No, it's Eliza. It's like it's biblical. Wow,
right?
Ooh, that was a close one.
Yeah.
How about Piano Man? I went with Traveling Prayer. This was a tough one. Like Captain Jack, I've just heard enough times. Yeah. Certainly not take a Piano Man with me. I'm a big fan of Ain't No Crime and Worst Comes to Worst, but it just didn't feel Desert Island to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I always loved Traveling Prayer. And in a similar way, I guess autobiographically or whatever, as I could talk about You Make Me Free, you know, it was a situation where I knew Piano Man, obviously, kind of inside and out that song. And then I kind of still remember the first time I went over to my cousin's house and he put the record on for me and we started from the beginning of the album. And I don't think I had actually heard country music at that point, growing up in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was one commercial that used to come on about, oh, your favorite country hits on this radio station. One time I was like, hey, Dad, put on this. He's like, why that one? I'm like the commercial says, oh, your favorite country hits. And he's like, get the hell out of here. We're not listening to that. And so listening to this song, it was almost mystical to me. You know, it was this thing, like you knew it was country music in some fashion. And it was just, you know, this character that I had never heard Billy do before for all the Billy I had heard at that point. And I like that it's like a folk song. It's something, you know, Dolly Parton's done it. That's one that can really get picked up by other artists.
Yeah.
And I think if you're stuck on a desert island, that one makes a lot of sense.
It's folky without being too stereotypically folky, which I like.
And just those opening piano stabs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny
That's a
because
great
like,
choice.
yeah, when you realize that like most people didn't have Cold Spring Harbor, if they got the record and they put that on, that's their first introduction to Billy playing piano. And he's being real cagey about it. You know,
That's a bold opening.
it is. Yeah, because it starts with brushes and bass.
Right.
You know, he didn't put Ain't No Crime first. Ain't No Crime would have been a banger first. But no, he really opened the scene with that one. That imagery stuck with me. So I'm going with that one.
I ended up going with Somewhere Along the Line.
Mm.
I love the imagery of the tune, and it's a great story song, and it, you know, I can kind of feel like I can kind of get inside his head on this one. Piano Man might be one of my more overlooked albums that I don't revisit a ton, but the more I drill down, you mentioned Traveling Prayer, Somewhere Along the Line, Ain't No Crime. Like there's so many really good songs that nobody has heard on the, you know, on a large scale. But this one, something about this one, great intro. Great guitar work. The band's in hot, and then it kind of backs away, and it's just Billy by himself. Then the band comes back in. It's very, you know, it's almost triumphant in a way in spots. It's very musical, and like it feels like a musical in a way where it's got so much dynamic to it.
You know, when he talks about Summer Highland Falls, and he said something to the effect of like, that's the first time I feel like I really pulled something off, like marrying, I think, the music and the lyrics. You know, how the repetitiveness of the piano arpeggios like illustrates the theme of the song. You're right that Somewhere Along the Line also does that very well, because it's like such a song about being like up and down in life, that, you know, going from like just him singing to the whole band and the backup singers, and then back down to him and back and forth. Yeah, it definitely illustrates that idea really well.
Yeah, it's almost like there's moments of like, here's my inner thoughts where it's just quiet and me, and then here's what I'm projecting to the world, and then I'm going back to my inner thoughts.
Yeah, you know, it's that. And sometimes I take it as like emotional surges.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like be it frustration or happiness at what's going on, you know, because it just kind of keeps going back and forth. And it's another one that's unusual for him in that there's a scene to it where he's in France, which is like so random, but it's such a romantic image of him just sitting at some like sidewalk cafe smoking a cigarette.
Right.
In Paris, you know, or wherever.
It's a pleasure to be soaking in this European rain.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's a movie.
Yeah. Well, just think about that line. It's a pleasure to be soaking in the European rain. Like, he's sitting outside in the rain. Why?
Right.
Like, is he hitchhiking and he just got stuck out there and he's like just reached this moment of radical acceptance? Or is he defiantly sitting outside? Like, no, I made it here. I'm enjoying my cup of coffee outside. This has been my dream, and I'm going to make this my dream no matter what, you know?
Right.
Like, it's a funny, it's a funny thing for a song about things never quite going your way. That idea that you finally make it there and it's freaking raining and the weather sucks.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and these first couple verses, especially, are the very much, you know, between the wine and the cigarettes. It's like, I know this is bad for me. I'm going to regret it tomorrow, but right now, there's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
Yeah. That is a great desert island pick because it's one you can pick apart like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot you can chew on with it. And, I've known this song. I probably discovered this in the early mid 80s, when I was a kid. And I still don't think I have it completely cracked. So it's one I can ponder still.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got a lot of dimension to it. And it's fun realizing, as I got into the bootlegs and stuff, to realize that was such a concert staple for a while.
That's one song that actually carried all the way through the, a lot of the street life or a lot of the 52nd Street era. It really lasted a long time.
Yeah.
But when it fell out for good.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one that doesn't quite work in an arena either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good theater in a club. Good theater song.
It is. Yeah. But past that, it gets lost in the cavern. It's like Summer Highland Falls, like we kind of said about that too. It just doesn't quite play the same way.
Yeah, because I remember you and I kind of actually talking about that because on the first Madison Square Garden show where they played Summer Highland Falls, it's like musically, it's not that far off from Songs in the Attic, but just the simple nature of the vastness of that venue versus the club they cut it at for Songs in the Attic. It's a major factor in how the song comes across. Street Life Serenade. It's interesting. That's an album in general that I wore out in the 80s when there were so many other Billy albums to be played.
Mm-hmm.
Something about this record, and I apparently was the only one at the time, but I love this record.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up as a suburban kid in Michigan, the Great Suburban Showdown, something about that. And then as I became a teenager and was bored with everything else but music, I always loved it.
Street Life, I got into when the box set came out. It was one for me that, like, when you've listened to everything else, you realize you've overlooked Street Life Serenade. And so it feels good. Like it feels fresh going in. And, when I was a kid, I just didn't quite have the patience for the second side. And so like that one fell out pretty quickly, but now, I can listen to the whole thing and I can like really get a piece of souvenir and I can, I'm blanking on the name. What's the one ballad on the second side? Oh God. This is what happens when I do this late at night.
I'm looking. Last of the Big Time Spenders.
Thank you. Yes. Last of the Big Time Spenders. I knew it had to do with money and I couldn't place it.
And here I just get done saying how much I obsessed over this record in the 80s. Well, that was the 80s and 90s apparently because I couldn't pull that one out of my brain.
Yeah. Well, it is like the nadir of that record.
It is.
Arguably. So I went with Street Life Serenader. I always kind of dug this one. And then when we did the listen through, and it was not even when I did my own listen through, it was when we sat down and picked that one apart that I really came to love that song. It was the moment when we talked about Child of Eisenhower, that line, where I realized like what a poetic song it was and how well orchestrated it is. Like that to me is on par with like Pet Sounds. That to me is on par with Brian Wilson composing and arranging these pocket orchestras. Like there's so much less than when he was working with the Wrecking Crew, but
right.
He makes such great use of rock instrumentation and just rock instrumentation. No strings, no horns, no ensembles, no chorus, not even a synthesizer. It's another one with meat on the bone lyrically and feeling how it goes together. It's another great imagery song.
Yeah. And lyrically, it's a 5.5 minute song, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 5 stanzas, 5 verses, no chorus. And they alternate, the Street Life Serenader, then Midnight Masquerader, back and forth. Then coming out of the solo, it's back to Street Life Serenader and Midnight Masquerader again. But it's like, for as short and direct as it is, it to me tells such a bigger story than the lyrics would indicate.
Because it becomes more than just the words. It's the sequencing of it. It's the swells in it. That's really telling the story. He's almost repeating these things as a mantra, if you will. And the music is taking over. And I think that's probably what I like about it, is that it's really it's letting music actually tell a story in a very palpable way. It reminds me, what's a song like that? Aqualung.
Oh yeah.
That's a song. It's a long song, and it doesn't have a lot of lyrics. He repeats a lot. You get a lot out of a few lyrics, you know? Like a great one in that is you catch your rattling last breaths with deep sea diver sounds, and the flowers bloom like magic in the spring.
Oh yeah.
Like it's just talking about death and rebirth, but just in such a throwaway line, you know? And not throwaway, but in such a subtle line. And I think you only get away with that, like Billy got away with it in Street Life, when you allow yourself to write very few lyrics for a long song, and you don't overstay your welcome lyrically. You fuse that with the music and you really tell a full comprehensive story that way.
We're not talking about the live stuff, but this was never like a big set list song. I mean, the songs of the Attic, that was a sound check.
Yeah.
So they weren't even playing it live even then.
Right.
He talks about how Captain Jack is repetitive. That's got the chorus. That's got all the different elements that you would feel make it less repetitive. But he doesn't talk about this one too. But funny enough, there's less to this song, but it does feel like there's more movement.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of movement in it, you know.
Yeah.
It's just that moment when he's just hitting the one note and everything comes in around it, like that's astounding.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like goosebump stuff right there.
Yeah, that's very undersung.
Mm-hmm. That's a great pick.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a great song.
We're moving on to Turnstiles now. 1976. The Lords of 52nd Street have joined the band. And so with me, I picked the song that to me is quintessential early Lords to me, and that's Summer Highland Falls.
Okay.
Two components to this. One, I love the lyric. It's one of my favorite mid-70s Billy's lyric. I always identified, they say that these are not the best of times, but they're the only times I've ever known. And I believe there's a time for meditation in cathedrals of our own. There's some imagery there, but it's still kind of more universal. It's not too out there with the lyric. I love the way the piano playing works with the lyrics, but the band, like when I think early Lords, like the groove, I like lock into Liberty and Doug so much, and I love it. I can never get sick of the two of them on this song.
Yeah.
And, Richie coming in with the great tenor saxophone solo. And it's just, to me, there's just the perfect elements of what made that band so special at this time. And between that and the lyrics and the melody, I'm in on this song 100%.
I'm almost surprised I didn't pick that one myself, if for no other reason that I keep overlooking it. We don't play it live really. For as much as I love it, it doesn't get a lot of play, which would make it fresh. I do remember when I was transcribing it, to your point about Lib and Doug, hearing not only how locked in they are, what they're doing on the verse is not like a one measure repeat. Rhythmically, it keeps moving around. And it's like, man, they must have like just carved that out, hashed that out night after night by rote until it reached the point where that's how they were doing it.
Yeah.
Know?
Those verse grooves, it's a nice tight, like 4-bar phrase.
Yeah, exactly. And they are like just so locked in for such a spare, slow groove, which are like so much harder to play well than a fast one. Like to play it that slow and make it groove, and to lock in with another person like that bass drum and the bass guitar are they are one and the same.
So you have that as that single unit, and then you key into Doug and Billy's left hand, and that unit, those three elements create is, I get why Billy was excited when they all got together.
Now, I didn't pick that one, and I'm kind of almost not crazy about my pick, but I'll stand by it. However, as you quoted the lines, especially the one with Cathedral, I'm scanning, and I'm going to say this is the last time until Blonde Over Blue that he evoked imagery that far removed from gritty reality. For as sort of fanciful as like scenes from an Italian restaurant gets, with its time warping and this epic and these stories and this and that, every word of that is rooted in like Long Island, in a blue collar real world. Summer Highland Falls is the last time for a very long time that he wanders into the world of the imagination and cathedrals of
Yeah.
our own, in this sort of like fantastic, almost otherworldly imagery.
It became pretty much a lot of like the everyman universal, like relatable.
Yeah,
Not that that's not relatable lyrically, but it's like,
that's
like you said, it's
fanciful.
like the blue collar. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he mined some great stuff from the blue collar, certainly. But you can make a compilation of the early stuff that was fanciful. I may make that playlist soon. Just see how many of those. There's not many, but there's a few of them. And all that said, that's a great pick. I went with Angry Young Man. I'm like, I love that album. It's like, well, what are you going to pick off it? I'm like, well, I'm not taking Miami because that I've heard too many times.
Yeah.
Do I go with James? Maybe, but I might get bored of that on a desert island. So I'm going to go with the big Liberty has entered the chat moment.
Yeah.
I love the bridge. The Moog on the bridge is like a classic Billy bridge.
It's amazing to me how like the Moog solo and then the other time where it's the vocal and the first time around,
Mm-hmm.
it's working around the same melody, but they feel so different and unique.
Yeah, it's variation on a theme. It's his classical leaning coming out in again that amazing fusion of classical and rock that he doesn't get credit for. That, as I say from time to time, that there's the alternate universe where he was head to head with Keith Emerson, and the difference is Billy fused it more. Keith wore it on his sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
Keith Emerson is astounding. There is an amazing like 8 or 11 minute, I forget which version of Lucky Man with the Keith Emerson band in Russia. And this was after arthritis had set in and he couldn't play that well. But the sounds he got out of that rig just very quickly surpassed Western notation, Western harmonics, and was just pure emotion via electronic pulses and signals. That was amazing. But, he was also the guy that arranged pictures at an exhibition and Hoedown and Jerusalem for a rock band. And Billy brought the classical to rock where, Keith brought the rock to classical, I guess you would say. It's that vacillation too that he did with Street Life, where the story is not just the lyrics. And I think that's something that critics didn't catch sometimes when he's just writing this snotty lyric about like an insolent bastard. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're missing the way the music tells the other half of the story, where there's that shift in perspective. I believe I've passed the age of consciousness and righteous rage. What is he saying when he can't express it lyrically anymore and he has to play this like soaring, bittersweet solo on the Moog that's a variation on what he said? I've been watching Apocalypse Now again. I've been told by Alexis to stop watching it while I'm driving. To which I tell her, I'm not watching it, I'm listening. And she says, bullshit. But so I go through it again and again. And I've always said about that movie, which, came around almost around the same time as this stuff. That's a movie that starts grounded in reality and just keeps going and to the point where like traditional narrative can no longer express what Francis Ford Coppola is trying to express about the Vietnam War or anything else. And you have to deal with Marlon Brando just babbling and somebody just cutting up a cow for no reason on screen, ostensibly no reason. In the same way that like, it's this idea that like, that's why you're using a medium other than just words. That's why this is art. It's because it's not just saying, I feel this way, and maybe having to like take 3 paragraphs to explain yourself. It's when you're able to condense all that into a few seconds and even to say it with music in a way that like you could never cut with words. That's what he does, going from the bridge he sings to the bridge he plays. And I think that's really what makes that work. Whew.
So for The Stranger, I am going with the title track from the record. We're getting into the era where there's so many big songs and it's tough because there's so many I love, but like you've talked about before, it's like, you've heard Miami so many times and seen so many times and this so many times, and you don't want to fatigue yourself if that's the only one you got for the rest of time. To me, I've always loved the groove. Again, back to the groove, the Doug and Liberty of it all with Billy. This is another masterclass in that groove. And I just love the way it all works together. Those big legato whole notes get me every time on the bass guitar. Lyrically, so often Billy is talking about you or him, things like that. This is an interesting turn where he's talking about we, and very specifically, we all have a face, we all fall in love, where he's including himself in the narrative with somebody else, with everybody, with the audience.
Yeah.
But it starts casually too. Like the verses, well, we all fall in love. Well, we all have a face. Like starting it with the word well, I thought is an interesting choice. Rhythmically, it works perfect. But if you're looking at the lyrics face to face, I always found that a fascinating choice. Lyrically, it's an interesting way to talk about putting on a mask and, hiding your true self. I'm turning myself into somebody I'm not really to protect myself.
Yeah, this is another one where you picked the one that I was really split on. Well, I'll just say now that I went with Scenes, and I'll explain why in a moment, but I will say Stranger was a close contender. Because again, this is, I think, the example of it's almost as fanciful and metaphorical as those moments in Summer Highland Falls and a few of those earlier fanciful songs, but it's so rooted in reality. I gotta say, this song used to creep the hell out of me as a kid. You knew something was up, man. It was, and it wasn't the whistling at the beginning or none of that. It was that once I used to believe I was such a great romancer that I came home to a woman that I could not recognize. I knew something was up there.
It's there's darkness there.
It's sort of like Candy's Room in a way. It's sort of speaking to a rarely touched upon instance of sort of male sexual vulnerability. Candy's Room and The Stranger are those rare songs where a dude, let alone a rock star, sort of talks about how a woman makes him feel like a child, and not in a demeaning way. In just that, Bruce talks about going up these steps. It's so creepy and primordial almost, and it's that same thing. It's, what does it mean to come home to a woman you don't recognize? Being divorced, now that I think about it, I got a little piece of that.
You're talking about the intro with the whistling. It transitions perfectly in the opening of the tune.
Yeah.
I think it sets the table so well. But again, this is just an aside to the song since we're talking about it. I've always found it kind of interesting. They didn't know how to, it feels like they didn't quite know how to end the song because they're well, we'll just fade this guy out, fade this guy back in. And it just seemed like a bit of an awkward transition out where it worked so masterfully to set the table at the beginning.
Well, I'll go ahead and retcon that. I never got the film noir feel when I was a kid. It seemed casual, like the dude was just walking down the street whistling to himself. Now imagine that as this sort of scene or this moment where, a person's going about their life and suddenly is forced to reckon with this existential angst. There was a trigger that happened in his world that threw him into this mental state where he was suddenly faced with thinking about all these things. Then he comes out of it again, because that's kind of how life goes, man. You walking down the street, you get hit with something, you got to go on. What are you going to do? You're going to sit in your room for the next 3 months? No, you still got to go to work. So you just you get brrr, and you go back to whistling down the street. You're not quite the same.
Bear with me for a second, but you have sometimes a fantasy video, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, it starts out, it's him dialing, and then the phone rings, and then she picks it up, the song starts, and the whole song happens. But unlike the album track, the video, as it's getting to the end, does a hard cut to the phone still ringing.
Yeah.
And him waiting for her to pick up, to where this whole sequence was the fantasy in his head all along.
Right. I'm almost going to make another Apocalypse Now reference.
Do it.
Just that sort of idea of going into your psyche. And Billy's doing it. He's like, he's jumping in and he's coming back out.
Yeah.
And sometimes a fantasy, it's like, it's a deep dive into your psyche and coming right back out, in the video is what it does there. All right. I'm going to tell you something ridiculous for as heavy as I got. When I was a kid, and I told you this song freaked me out, right?
Yeah.
And that's a verse because you knew that, you know what sex was yet, but you knew there was something going on. You knew there was a reason you weren't allowed to watch certain movies. Your mother would be like, get enough for you, out of the room.
Right.
We're watching this thing, I didn't know the lyric was for a reason. I thought he was saying a nonsense word. I thought it was Falowiza. And I thought it was some goofy ass slang for vagina. And I literally, in my head, because apparently I was a goddamn pervert.
Clearly.
Yeah. I was like, okay, he came home to his woman he didn't recognize, so he like fiddled her a little and didn't get a response.
And she didn't say anything.
Yeah.
That's even darker.
I'm a fucked up individual.
I was not expecting this.
Yeah, neither was I. I think I was like walking around trying to retcon this in my head. Yeah, so that kind of like, I really freaked you out, didn't I?
Yeah, it did. Gotta go.
Yeah. You're like, listen, we're gonna have a raw song for a couple episodes. Yeah. Michael's like, I need an adult. Let's see if I have the balls to leave that in. I think this is like a great metaphor for how I live.
Mm-hmm.
The song Cassidy by the Grateful Dead?
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful song. For the longest time, I thought the line was wheel to the storm and fly, which I took as you're brave enough to drive through a storm. Like you put your hands on the steering wheel and you just white knuckle it through whatever's happening. Yeah. Right. And so for all I, try to barge through walls like the Kool-Aid man and end up with a concussion instead, if I hit the stud.
Or you're like that one in Family Guy where you remember that sketch? It was like early on. It was like a courtroom scene and somebody was like found guilty. And it was like, oh no, oh no, oh no. And then Kool-Aid man bursts in, oh yeah. Oh yeah. And then realizes what's going on. And then he tiptoes back out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the line is actually wheeled to the storm and fly, which is a completely different idea. Yeah. It's the idea of going with the wind, going with the flow, not fighting against it to get where you need to go. And I'm like, maybe that's where I need to like change my approach to life. Maybe the Grateful Dead was right, but I was just wrong. I just heard them wrong, all right. That was a good diversion. Where the hell are we?
Okay. That was great. We're having so many great asides and back and forth about these tunes and the other stuff. It's like we've done an hour on 5 albums.
Yeah, this is like when we did love songs and we all of a sudden got like super deep.
We're like, right? No, this is really going that direction, which is awesome. But we should have put like Attila and Hassel's albums on here too.
I was thinking about that, like Burn This.
A Desert Island is California Flash.
Yeah. That's some like you made yourself like a grass skirt. You're like do. Like that's how you get that's how you're gonna get rescued, because like that's when the search party with the camera crew is gonna show up. You're doing your one-man conga line, the California Flash.
We got a live one over here, fellas.
Should we get it? Let's just give him a minute.
Take him to Bellevue.
Yeah, right. Scenes. It's really for the reasons we've always talked about. It's that epic. It's that time slipping. It's that bigger picture of realizing that it's the couple when they're older, when they're not together anymore, and they're meeting at this restaurant. And in the same way that I like the old Universal horror movies, one of the things I've come to love about them is how much you get to fill in the blanks yourself. If you watch like Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolf Man especially, let's compare that for a quick moment, and I'll bring this back to Billy Joel, to like the Marvel movies, right? Where like, you get these huge 2-parters, you get these like 2.5 hour movies where they have to spell out every single facet of everything they introduce, right? And when you watch the old Universal movies, they just hint at stuff. Like in The Wolfman, there's just these hints of like the prodigal son sort of story, and this like conflict between the father and the son that gets resolved via subtext, you know? And in your mind, you fill in the blanks. Well, where was he when he was like not living at home? Where did he go? What happened? You make up what happened in between them, you know? And Scenes from an Italian Restaurant sort of lets you do that because he jumps in time so many times and he tells a coherent story. But there's so many gaps that your imagination gets to fill them in. And so were I on a desert island, not only would I enjoy the song, I mean, you could come up with like a different story every time. You could come up with different angles, you know, different directions for the characters between these points every time you listen to it, were you so inclined.
This is one of those songs that you could turn into a movie with storyline because it really, there's so many components to it, and you could really see this getting blown out into like a feature script. It's like, you know, he gave you just enough information to be dangerous with the story, where you can like there are important anchor points, but enough space in between to where you feel like you know the characters enough to where you could, you know, fill in the blanks.
And you could project on them too. Like you could put yourself in that situation, and how would my life lead me to these points? You know, how my experiences and my choices, that kind of thing. All right. On to arguably his, I don't know. I was going to say his least impressionistic album, his grittiest, 52nd Street.
Yeah, certainly his grittiest. It's evident in the artwork and the music videos.
Yeah.
Like everything about it. New York City, summer of 78.
Yeah.
Where everything's dirty. There's a dinge to everything.
Yeah.
And if you look at that front cover, the wall is filthy behind him. Billy's shoes are dirty. And it's like everything about it just felt gritty. Of course, we're talking about 52nd Street, which was 1978. It's funny because as gritty as a lot of it is, then you'll have like a song like My Life,
right,
which is like kind of steps out of the grit a little bit. But you have a lot of the groove and the feel and music. It very much lives in there. The little aside before I get into my tune, I'm so glad that the footage for the music videos they thought to film at A&R, because I know they're staged and set up for a performance, so that's not how it looked when they recorded, but it's the one view we have into that era of what it was like when they were making records.
We have an episode coming up with Bradley, and he sort of mentioned it, but it was as we were starting, so it's not going to make the episode, where he was talking about just like there were just so few documents from these classic studios that even he can find anywhere. You know, so yeah, it's a very rare glimpse.
I think too, another great video. Again, this is Studio A1 at A&R Recording, which is where Stranger 52nd Street, Glass Houses, I think, was done there before they moved to Chelsea Sound Studios in 81. There's also footage from, I want to say 71, 72 of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young doing vocals.
Oh.
In the live room there. And then there's a documentary from, I want to say might have been 83 of Frank Sinatra when he recorded a record. I forget the name of the record. That was done by Phil in A&R. So you get some good visuals of the studio there. And I think you might see Brad Lee for a brief moment or two throughout that documentary as well in the background.
I'll have to check that out.
The video is Portrait of an Album. What's the album though? LA is My Lady.
Speaking of both of them, if you haven't checked out Brad Lee's interview with Elliot Shiner, 2 parts on YouTube, go check that out. I'm like halfway through the first one right now. Oh, it's fantastic. Brad does a great job of giving, they knew each other for so long anyway, so I'm sure that made it easier, but what a great job he does of prompting him and getting out of the way and letting Elliot really paint the scenes there.
And that's part of what I love trying to do with this podcast, is trying to fill in the blanks of like what it was like recording this stuff and what the vibe was like, what the room was like, and what the industry was like. And So hearing these kind of stories and, with Elliot not primarily working under, with Billy, but Elliot, was one of Phil Ramone's proteges, as it were. And so, you had Elliot Shiner and Jim Boyer, those are two of Phil's main guys, in the 70s into the 80s. Hearing those stories of what it was like working on some of these sessions, what the studios were like, what sessions were like, what the vibe, it just really helped paint a good picture and helped really understand a lot more, what the process was like working with Phil and working on these records back then.
It's really something we get to do with podcasts that Brad did to perfection, where we have the time for a deep dive. And since it's just audio, it's like, you don't get stuck with like, well, do we have enough images for a documentary? Do we have the budget for a documentary? Who's going to watch a 2.5 hour, 3 hour documentary about this? Probably no one, but we're going to listen to it. We don't have to be sitting down. We could be, working, or we could be, cleaning the house or whatever else, and listening to this podcast and getting the story that way. Before you get into 52nd Street, I think we got a 2-parter on our hands, which is fantastic.
I was thinking that as well.
Yeah.
Which is great. I love these, when we do these, we have no idea where it's going to go. It could be like, I got 4 things to say about this. Let's move on.
Yeah. Right.
But I'm super glad that this is unfolding the way it is.
Yeah, it is. So I think with that in mind, we're going to end this episode on 52nd Street. And that way we'll do 6 this time and 6 next time. All right. So 52nd Street, what do you got, sir? Go.
Yeah. So I ended up going with Until the Night. It's one of my favorite Billy vocal performances. I love the perfect use of strings, not overbearing, doesn't completely take it over. Yes, I know it was a very clear homage to the Righteous Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's denying that. Billy's going to be the first one to tell you that. I mean, that's what he says on Live from Long Island. Right. This one's dedicated to the Righteous Brothers. Yeah. It's a powerful ballad, and I love that when Billy goes into that territory, where it's a tender song in so many ways, but there's also a lot of power behind it. It's one of those where it's such a long song and it feels so short to me. It just sweeps and moves so well that I kind of get lost in it, and before I realize it, it's the last chorus and we're done.
I guess it must have been when I got this on cassette. I was listening to it, and maybe the first 2 or 3 times I didn't pay a ton of attention to the second side. And I remember the first time I heard the breakdown, or what I guess you would call the bridge in that song, I had just for all the times I had gone all the way through, I just kept forgetting it was there. And it was like I found a hidden track almost. I was like, what the hell is this? This is awesome. It was a funny thing. And once again, Half a Mile Away was like my close number 2 on this one. I just felt like for a desert island, it was going to be too rich. It was like, if you had to pack food for a desert island, you wouldn't pack 2 cannolis. You would probably pack some protein or vegetables. You're like, I really want a good cannoli, but if I have 2 of them, I'm going to get sick. Right. It's the weirdest metaphor I've come up with yet today. And I went somewhere weird on The Stranger. So
right. Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Oh yeah. For as much as this is an homage to the Righteous Brothers, it's like also the next step in the evolution of those songs, because he certainly nails the timbre and the musical approach. But the Righteous Brothers lyrics were so simple, bordering on simplistic, occasionally not juvenile, but certainly geared toward teenagers, right? Or young adults. It was very, I love you so much, that sort of thing. You don't love me anymore,
Right. Yeah, which is a Weird Al song too.
Yeah, got a funny feeling. I know that one. That one's got a dark line in it, right? That time he made it with the whole hockey team.
Right? I know.
Comes flying out of nowhere.
You're like, whoa, hold up. I was with you. What just happened here?
Somebody's not wearing Hawaiian shirts anymore. Jeez.
Anymore. No. But Until the Night, it's a very adult relationship. Yeah. It's instead of like the bubble gum.
Right.
I mean, and it even opens right there, with I never ask you where you go after I leave you in the morning. We go our different ways to separate situations. It's not that easy anymore. Like if you attach that lyric to something different musically, it could go on the nylon curtain.
Yeah.
It's about the struggles of a relationship as you get older.
Sidebar real quick, going back to the Stranger album. Devastating, like my theory that like the spiritual cousin, or the yin to the Scenes from Italian Restaurants yang is You Never Can Tell by Chuck Berry.
I don't know if you told me that before.
I put it on the Discord one time. Let me pull up the lyrics to this. So yeah, it's a great song. And the lyrics, it was a teenage wedding and the old folks wished them well. You could see that Pierre did truly love the mademoiselle. C'est la vie, said the old folks, it goes to show you never can tell, right? So it's got that same kind of like, Brenda, you're much too lazy and Etta can never afford it. Like, now, ready for this?
Yeah.
They furnished off an apartment with a 2-room Roebuck sale. Like Sears Roebuck.
What?
Right? They bought a souped up jitney, was a cherry red 53. They drove it down to Orleans to celebrate the anniversary. Like, so it's like that reference to New Orleans is in there too.
Yeah. Wow.
And so this is about like the teenage couple that got married and made it. And then Scenes from an Italian Restaurant about 20 years later is like the one that didn't make it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's quite a connection there, actually.
Isn't it? I wonder if he thought about it. We're gonna have to get it somebody.
Because we know Billy loved Chuck Berry too, so.
Yeah, and he was one to, call back to things he loved. Was he sort of thinking about a song like this and like,
like that's an interesting story song. What about the other side of that?
Right. Yeah. Because it was to his mind, he was writing about the couple that peaked too early.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a little bit of a bummer, but
Right.
Also, I tell you what, man, that's a song that you realize, Chuck had Chuck could drop what the kids would call a bar, like, that was like proto hip hop, what he was doing on this song, especially. A couple of them he can really do it. This one, Promised Land, was another one where he's just got that flow. It's like a freaking rap song, man. He's like a rapper on it. Mm-hmm. Cool stuff. Anyway, all that said, I'll make my 52nd Street quick now. And I went with Half a Mile Away because I decided to go with the grass skirt dancing around song. This is one where if I'm stuck on the desert island, every once in a while, I just want to,
Right.
I don't know. It was always this was always a fun song to me. It's one of those funny things when you're a kid and you're picturing what he's talking about. Wait for mama to turn out the light, crawl on the roof, and then I hit the night.
Yeah.
Like, you don't realize he's like a teenager or an adult. Like, I'm picturing myself in like my footy pajamas, be like, hee, I'm going to go over to my buddy Richie's house. We're going to play G.I. Joes, like in the middle of the night, like that's what you picture in your mind,
Right. Yeah.
It was just always a fun song, even for the sort of longing and the friction that's in there. It's the way it's told is, it's hopeful, it's that land over the horizon. You know what I mean? I just went for fun and haven't heard it to death for that one.
Yeah. For as gritty as, that he paints New York in the 70s, like that's like, yeah, it's gritty, but it's my gritty.
Yeah, it's sort of like, why people, it's reductive to say, oh, it's why people loved New York at the time, but it was like, it's sort of that like, mirror image of the same thing, two sides of the same coin.
Right.
Kind of thing. Like, that was, it was gritty, there was crime, and there was this and that, but like, it was also a roller coaster. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
everybody loves a roller coaster.
Well, and, I tell people, who haven't traveled there, and I've been lucky to travel there several times over the years, for work. And, it's like, it's one of those cities where it's like, man, like suddenly your energy just goes up 20 ticks because you're like, there is so much to explore, so much to do, so much to see that you're like, yeah, it's 2:30. Yeah, all right, cool. Let's go do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just there. It's just got such an energy around that city that is just exciting. And that's the vibe I got from this song.
And there's a sort of like bouncing jubilance to it that, again, growing up in Brooklyn as a kid, like you sort of felt that. It's hard to explain. It was like, like I always say, like when you saw like your dad and your uncles, like just hanging and doing their thing, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
They were sort of, almost like they were riding a wave of some sort,
Sure.
perhaps they were drunk, but point being, there was that, there was like excitement about it. I mean, I guess some people that grew up in Philly probably felt it, but I couldn't imagine they felt it the same way. And it certainly did not exist in the suburbs,
No, and see, me growing up in the suburbs, like this was my glimpse into the city at night.
Right.
I love songs like that gave me like a little window in of what it could be like. And that's why, I mean, kind of silly as it is, I remember the first time I came to New York, it was just one of those wide-eyed, like, so this is the setting for all these songs that I've grown up with. It was a really kind of special thing to finally like be immersed in it for real.
Well, that is halfway through Billy's catalog, and that's the end of part 1 of our Desert Island picks, 1 song per album. We're going to pick this up in 2 weeks. So this is, of course, the easiest ask we've made in a while. What are your Desert Island picks? What's the 1 song from each album from Cold Spring Harbor through 52nd Street that not only could you not live without, but that you could live with for a really, really long time? Just you and your beach ball.
Yeah.
Your
And
volleyball.
those can be two very different things. So think about
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Not like necessarily your favorite song, but what can go the distance.
Right. Email us, glasshousespodcast@gmail.com. Find us on the socials, Facebook, X, and Instagram under Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. Or, come tell us what you're thinking in real time over on our Discord server.
Yeah, absolutely. We started that, the end of 2022, I want to say. So it's a fun hang. We've got a great community of folks there. It's kind of like a chat room, message board where everyone can comment and talk. We go deep dives into Billy. There's a lot of collectors, so we talk about our collections. We talk about sports, other music we're into, just life in general. A lot of really cool people. And it's where we do our monthly watch parties where we get together and collectively watch video, whether it be Live from Long Island or a collection of music videos. It's a lot of fun. We get together every month and do that. It's just a good excuse for us to carve out some time where we can chat with everybody and have a collective experience. So if you're interested in any of that, so we've got links to all the socials, the Facebook, where you can review us, where you can help support the podcast, all that stuff is below in the show.
And until then, yes, we've only made it through half of Billy Joel's catalog, but don't worry, the other half is just a half a mile away. Oh!
There it is, baby.
Yep. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you soon, everybody. Thanks.